Good morning, Julia Locascio. Thank you for joining us. Julia is in London right now, joining us on this call. As many people watching this probably know, I'm here in California, and we're really grateful that Julia is able to join us for this. I've invited Julia in to talk a little bit about her work, but also to talk about devising theater in ways that resist the typical hierarchy that might be in a rehearsal or devising space. And so this is about a 35-minute video on that topic. Julia and I know each other because she was the assistant director on my Kite Runner show when it was in London. That was in, Julia, when was that?
Yeah, 2016.
That was 2016 we met. And
December 2016.
you've been doing some incredible work since then. Can you say a little bit about the work that you've been doing since?
Well, thank you, Matthew, for having me, and thank you to all the students at San Jose State. I'm really honored to be here to speak with you. Um, so as you can hear in my voice, though I live in London, I am indeed an American. I moved here in 2014 for grad school for an MFA in directing, and working on the Kite Runner was my first job out of grad school. So it was a special time. Since then, I have been making my way as a director and deviser of work. And what I mean by deviser is I facilitate the collective creation of new material. So quite often collectively made by actors and designers and me.
Julia, I'm struck, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but I'm struck by how the theater space, sort of traditionally framed, is particularly driven by a sense of hierarchy. There's, traditionally, there's the sort of playwright at the top who has final approval of the director and the cast and any changes that might be made, and then there's a director and everybody has great deference toward the director. And if there's an assistant or an associate director, a dramaturg, maybe they're next. I mean, we know this hierarchy like a totem pole or something. It's so well known to us who have worked in theater. uh, so I'm really intrigued to hear what you have to say today about how those sort of traditional hierarchies can be challenged and sort of taken apart in certain devising settings that maybe give people more equal footing with each other. Um, and I think that's really important work, especially as we start to work more collaboratively and in intercultural settings, with immigrants or refugees or other people who might be producing theater with us. These hierarchies can be really devastating in certain environments, which is
Yeah,
why it's worth thinking about how we might take them apart.
yeah. So something that I'm very passionate about is unpicking and rethinking the way that things are. And because my discipline, my kind of chosen life's purpose is theater, I'm thinking constantly about how to do that in the theater and how actually models of creation in the theater quite often mimic power structures in our society. So the traditional kind of playwright down model, I often do this when I talk about it, is kind of like a monarchy. I think some playwrights would disagree, but, which is their right. But just using it as a kind of starting point, yeah, just as you said, I think in American theater and British theater for the last, let's say, 200 years, we've developed this approach where a playwright uh, probably sits by themselves over a period of months and writes a play. Um, it's something that's completely of a single individual's brain. Then the expectation is that a director takes that script and interprets it. And a lot of people have a different sense of what interpret means. And then, as the triangle continues downwards, you've got a creative team of designers and the technicians that work with them. And then, of course, you have probably the biggest group of actors who are there to execute, embody the choices of the playwright and the director. And that's a model that will probably be very familiar to theater makers in the English-speaking world. When I talk about devising and when others talk about devising, I think it's really a quite broad umbrella term for anything that doesn't fit into that triangle. One kind of basic way of defining it is to say that it is collectively created. So many people have originating input. There are many authors to the source material that then gets made into something you see on a stage. But it's also, you can hear me kind of grappling with that just as we're talking, because devising can mean so many things. And what I wrote my master's dissertation on is a distinctly feminist approach to devising, which I don't have enough time to go into here, but it again is sort of thinking about traditional power structures as they relate to patriarchy and, the king rules the subjects model is in itself an inherited model that's attached to certain set of people, i.e. men, who have had a lot of power for all of human history. When we're talking today, Matthew, I might say the phrase source material a lot. And I think that's something that comes up in devising conversations because you don't have that script necessarily. You don't have the playwright's authored text that is usually the given starting point for how you make a show. So source material in devising can be anything from a text. So it could be an adaptation of a novel, for example. I think that sometimes falls under a devising umbrella, to maybe a real life event. Or you could even take music as a source material. There are examples of people taking albums and starting from there, or the work of a visual artist and starting there. So it's, in addition to expanding the scope of the creative voices in the room, it's also expanding the scope of where the piece starts, where the piece's origins are. One of the things that I do at the beginning of this talk that I think is very important and inspired by an amazing artist named Michael Road, who runs Sojourn Theater. Michael Road, he's developed, and his collaborators, they've developed a best practice model for arts-based civic dialogue. One of the things that he talks about is that whenever he's a participant in any kind of workshop, dialogue that's facilitated by someone else, he finds himself spending the first 15 minutes just trying to suss out who this person is. Who is this person? Why should I listen to them? Does their life experience have anything to say to me? Is it relevant to me? And so kind of what he came around to is, rather than when he's facilitating, just starting and waiting for everyone to just kind of finish watching him and wondering who he is, he's very transparent from the beginning. And I think this is great. We should be clear about where we speak from, and we should make visible the power structures that we are all a part of. So without further ado, let me tell you who I am. So again, my name is Julia Locascio. I am a white, straight, cisgendered American woman. I'm 31. My pronouns are she, her. I do not have any physical disabilities. I was raised in a large house in a suburb of Chicago. My father was raised in a working class Italian American neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. He's an attorney. My mother had inherited money and did not work. My parents were able to pay for me to study acting and directing at NYU. I did not receive financial aid, and I'm extremely privileged to not have student loan debt. There is mental illness in my family and a history of depression, alcoholism, and suicide. I sometimes experience powerful depression and anxiety. Now, that's who I am, and these are my values. I believe that white supremacy exists and that it's enshrined in law, our institutions, and reaches into all parts of daily life. I believe that we live in patriarchy, Western capitalist hegemony led by the United States, and that human actions and greed have led to climate catastrophe. I'm part of a system that privileges me, and I'm engaged in a lifelong process of becoming aware of those privileges, what exactly they give me, and what it is like to not have them. So I'm constantly working on developing my knowledge of all of those privileges and how they function. I believe it's my responsibility to use my privilege to become aware of the ways I'm prejudiced and to break down systems of discrimination. I also believe it's my responsibility to proactively build relationships with people who haven't had the privileges I've had and who aren't necessarily in my social circle, and lay the groundwork to support and platform the voices who haven't had the access I've had. Now, how is devising relevant to what I've just shared with you? I moved to London, as I said, in 2014 to do a master's in theater directing. And my focus has been breaking down hierarchy in the theater. What I would love to share with you is a number of devising companies that I've encountered both in the US and the UK, and their methodologies, their kind of approaches to breaking down hierarchy in their rehearsal rooms. And that's where democracy comes into devising and democracy. This is a tiny amount of time to take all of this on, and I'm being bombastic and ambitious with doing it. We could spend lifetimes talking about racism, sexism, ableism, ageism, transphobia, queerphobia, heteronormativity, Western hegemony. We're not going to get there, and my aim is just to give you a little bit of a flavor of these companies and some of their ideas. Anyone who's watching this video, you know, I really encourage you to dig deeper and Google the companies and find videos of their work. If anything I say excites you or enrages you, probably more importantly the latter, harness those feelings and take them further. Okay, Brecht. Brecht is one of the originating voices of devising as we know it in the 20th and 21st centuries. Now, again, we could spend many semesters talking about Brecht, and I'm going to give you a very unsatisfying overview of some of his ideas, but just to talk about how these companies just didn't come out of nowhere. Brecht was a playwright and director who was working in the early 20th century in Germany. Some of you will probably be familiar, may have already studied him with Matthew. What's relevant to what I'm talking about is that a lot of people point to Brecht as the originator of a kind of split in Western theater. he emphasized theater as a live event, the focus on the event nature of theater as opposed to a kind of literary exercise. That's the distinction that people make. It's not like you're seeing a book on a stage. It's like you're seeing a rock concert or a political rally. He also had this thing called the Verfremdung effect, or people call it the V effect if they can't speak German, like I can't speak German. Very roughly, that this is this idea of making the familiar unfamiliar, or making the unfamiliar familiar. I'll talk about that a little bit later and give a more concrete example. Then there's the principle of helping audiences think critically about what they're seeing, in addition to feeling for the characters, or having empathy for the characters. So Brecht believed that you should be gripped by a series of intellectual ideas and care about what's going on the stage at the same time. And then he was instrumental in some ways that we've seen people experiment with theatrical form in the last 100 years. So if you've heard the phrase breaking the fourth wall, I'm sure many of you have, speaking directly to an audience, going into an audience. So again, my extremely reductive tracing of two strands of theater in the Western world in the last 100 years is there's kind of this realistic strand, which is along the left side here. You see the Stanislavski camp. This is what Brecht called dramatic theater, so focusing on telling a story in a really straightforward way, in a way that kind of looks like our life. And then there's this other strand, the experimental strand, the Brecht camp, what he called epic theater, focus on theater as a live event, something that couldn't happen in any place that didn't have, a group of bodies together, something we cannot do right now in the pandemic. And really what I'm getting to with all this is that the realistic strand is where we find the playwright as the originating artist model. And you could say that you could trace the more collaboratively created, or the director edits the material strand, to Brecht. Another thing that Michael Rohde talks about is kind of a devising process can live anywhere on the spectrum from anarchy to tyranny. And he's using those words kind of provocatively, to use that word again, but anarchy being the type of process. So when we say anarchy, right, it's kind of like the mob, the fear that the mob, the French Revolution, the mob is going to come and cut off all the rich people's heads. And when we say tyranny, we mean, well, something that feels kind of familiar recently, but one person who has a strong personality, who is maybe a monarch, maybe a strong man of some kind, and calls all the shots. And, I think within political thought, a lot of people place approaches to government on that spectrum. But what Michael Rohde does is he places theater rehearsal process on that spectrum. And actually, as a company, Sojourn Theater will come to each process and at the beginning decide together where on that spectrum they want to fall. And also, he suggests that can shift through the course of a process. So to be more tangible about this, what I mean is, on the anarchy side, every single person in the room has to agree on every single choice that's made, from you know, main character will walk 5 steps to the right in scene 2 when he's angry. That will be a choice that's agreed on by everyone. The ingenue is going to wear a blue dress. Everyone has to agree on that, which seems a bit absurd, but I'm talking about the very end of that spectrum. Then if you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, it would probably be a director who was also the writer, who dictated every single thing that happened on the stage. The facial expressions, the way the lines were said, when the music cues started, etc. And what he proposes is that it's not that a group has to be in agreement about every single choice. It's not that maybe you want a single voice at one point in the process, like maybe we suggest during the tech period when you're really close to putting the show up, someone says, it's this, it's this, it's this. But that actually, these are all questions for groups who are collectively creating to answer together and to kind of make an agreement about how they want to work at the beginning. So inspired by that kind of rehearsal room as political spectrum, that's also how I've organized thinking about these companies. And the first company I want to talk about is the team. And for me, of these companies, they fall furthest towards anarchy. And what I mean by that is the actors have the biggest say in what they're going to do up on that stage. The team's a very important company to me. Rachel Chavkin, who has now become massively successful theater director. She won a Tony Award recently for her production of Hadestown. She started a company with her fellow NYU graduates in 2004, and they did a lot of work in New York. They also did some work over here in Edinburgh, and the team stands for the Theater of the Emerging American Moment. So a lot of their work is about kind of telling the story of contemporary America back to America. They also, and I won't show it right now, but we're going to provide this slideshow for you guys to explore. If you click on this link down here, character, it'll take you to a little clip from their show Rusa Belvis. And I think it's a really good example of how the actors in the team are the directors of their own character. So when they work, the expectation is that each actor actually comes into the room with a character that they're pitching to become part of the show. And what Rachel, the director, does is take that series of characters and weave them into a story, and they all kind of collectively weave them into a story. So you could also, one way of putting it is like each actor is a playwright of the story of their character. Here is a little clip of this group working, the team. What I love about this video is it shows them working together a bit. It shows how not only they're making the show together, but they're also dealing with the trials and tribulations of the business of making theater. And you're going to hear from Heather Christian, who is the composer. She's actually pictured right here. She's the composer of the piece they're working on in the clip. It's a show called Mission Drift, and how she has to write music for the group of people in the room who happen to be mostly women, and she's lacking male voices. So again, this is from their show Mission Drift, and it is about the history of capitalism in the West.
I do agree about the whole vibe of the male energy, and I think if we can find a man, we need a man.
I think if we just have one man, I mean, this music is gonna get real vaginal.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts? I don't want us to.
I'm having a hard time thinking about it concretely because we don't, to my knowledge, have a concrete date of when the damn thing has to be finished.
We do.
We do.
Sort of. We have a concrete.
We have a concrete pencil. What's the concrete pencil?
Concrete. The title of our next show is A Concrete Pencil. Somewhere between December and February, basically, for the premiere. So that's the concrete pencil. That's the concrete.
It's next winter.
It's next winter. So why don't we walk away from the table and then we'll come back and be in creative mode.
One of the amazing things about the team is that they, as I was saying, they take music as their source material. They are one of these companies that starts from, almost gives equal importance to the idea of story as a place to start, character as a place to start, but also music and the kind of vitality of music as a place to start. Another thing, and if you wanted to go back and watch the video again via the slideshow, students, you might be able to see that Heather Christian, the composer, is actually in the show as well. She plays in this show about the history of capitalism, she plays the character of Miss Atomic. And so not only was she acting in the show, but another one of her collective creation responsibilities was to write all the music for the show. So the next company that I would love to share with you, Urban Bushwomen. Now, Urban Bushwomen, that's up there. They've been working since 1984. They're kind of New York based, but they work all over the country. Oops, sorry. They are a company that is led by Black women And they not only are leaders in the community engagement movement, and I'll say more about what that means, or actually I'll let Urban Bush Women say more about what that means, but they actually invented the term community engagement. So not only do they make new pieces of collectively created theater, they also go into communities and create stories with community members. So here is Urban Bush Women.
We started with movement, bodies, limbs, shapes, rhythm, choreography. Then we became a movement, bringing to light untold and undertold stories of the disenfranchised from a woman-centered perspective. As members of the African diaspora community, tipping the balance of power in the dance world and beyond. Our movement, made of movement, is fervent and big-hearted. We are insistent and active. We are receptive and always learning. We are full of hope. We are Urban Bush. My name is Jawole Willa-Jo Zoller, and I am the founding artistic director and chief visioning officer of Urban Bush Women. When I formed this company, it was through the philosophy of making work together. Dancers, musicians, poets, visual artists, we told stories, and every single one of us had a story to share. Our premiere performance was June 30th, 1984, with a company of 7 women. Soon after, we were performing all over New York City, establishing our voices right away. We were embraced by the women's community, the experimental arts community, the social justice community. We began touring. We performed Anarchy, Wild Women, and Dinah, dances about women who made their own way on their own terms. Our dances had singing and storytelling, and they were bodacious. But during a performance in Charleston, South Carolina, I looked out into the audience and I didn't see any Black people. Well, I saw 2. So Urban Bush Women decided to go out and find African-American audiences and working class folk and people of color by visiting schools and churches and community centers. Someone told me that this was outreach. We wanted to go deeper. I made works about homelessness, shelter, and it won awards. Lipstick was about girls becoming women. It showed Urban Bush Women makes dances about social justice, and the buzz that followed both works led to more touring, and more touring led to more outreach. But we still felt we had more to offer. So in the early 1990s, we were invited to plan and facilitate a long-term residency in New Orleans. We started calling our work community engagement to distance it from the concept of outreach. We entered community through town hall meetings and talked to our hosts to let the themes emerge from the community. We didn't present ourselves as experts from New York. We wanted to learn and grow with the communities we were there to serve. And we always kept dance as a powerful center to the community engagement work. We established our Summer Leadership Institute at Florida State University. The curriculum combined art, culture, and social issues and aimed to train a new dancer for a new society. We were going deeper, and then in 2000, we faced a financial crisis. It made us look long and hard at what we value as a company. We fought to survive. We wrote and committed ourselves to core values that still guide us today. Urban Bush Women validates the individual, supports progressive social change, builds and nurtures trust, enters community and co-creates stories, celebrates the African diaspora, and recognizes that place matters.
I think the thing that is really inspiring, incredible, I mean, just momentous about urban bush women is what she says about the focus moving from outreach, quote unquote, outreach to community engagement, that there is such condescension in a term like outreach that, you know, it's New York artists visiting communities who know less about the way that stories are told and art is made. And now I think certainly in the UK, community engagement is the term that's used kind of everywhere in the theater community. So, I just want to emphasize, you know, she lists them so easily, but I think each of these principles of her company are really important. Urban Bush Women validates the individual, supports progressive social change, builds and nurtures trust, enters community and co-creates stories, celebrates the African diaspora, and recognizes that place matters. That's a lot. And I think their work over the last 30 plus years has really focused equally on all of those things.
So this will conclude the first of 2 videos, and then we'll jump in with the second video, which will be linked right below this one. Julia, thank you. Such incredible work. And thank you for these videos too, because it's really great to see the companies in action, so to speak. It's great to see them kind of applying the ideas that you're talking about here, and we can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. And we'll continue with the second video right below.